Happy Friday, everyone! You get to see me 2 days in a row this week. Aren't you excited? I'm excited. I even have my other Museum of Making Music shirt on. This is my charcoal Museum of Making Music shirt. The other one, yesterday's, I think, was just solid black because that's how most drummers and sound engineers and apparently mom at home producers do it. So I have probably several hundred of these shirts here at home that I can swap out. So no, I've done a change of clothes. I've got brand new outfit on. Coming to you today, Friday, August 21st. So happy to have you here. So happy that you could join us today for another Mom at Home. Today, very special guest, inventor, luthier, musician, guitarist, and someone who just generally believes that making music should be accessible to anybody, no matter what your skill level. So, in his pursuit to do that, Mr. Bob McNally has built quite the innovation that we have had on display at the museum and interactive area for many, many years. I think it goes even so far back as to the centennial of NAMM when they celebrated their 100th anniversary in 2001. I believe, if my memory serves me correctly, Bob, that there was a special centennial Strumstick too. So we're going to talk to Bob today. We're going to have Mr. Bill here, who is our by far biggest fan of the Strumstick at the Museum of Making Music. They're going to have a discussion about the origins, the uses of this instrument, the sound. We're going to get to hear it, so don't worry. There's going to be some marvelous playing going on, and kind of what's in store. So, gentlemen, thank you for joining us today at Mom at Home. Mr. Bill, welcome. Let me bring you up on our screen, and we'll get this conversation started.
That sounds great. Thank you, BJ. And I'm going to say I've been looking forward to this for a long, long time, Bob. We thank you for taking the time to join us this afternoon.
That's my pleasure. And I love the work that you guys do out there. I wish I lived closer so I could hang out.
Yeah, we could do some boogie boarding down here if you live down by the beach here. In any case, you are, well, I'm going to start by thanking you and Evelyn and your whole Strumstick team for your unwavering support of the Museum of Making Music for all these years. BJ said it so well, I think, from the centennial. You supplied us with instruments, with string sets, the laminated sheets with the 3 beginner level melodies. And I'm going to say this from personal experience, working in the Innovation Studio, unequivocally, I shouldn't have written that word, without a doubt, Strumstick is the instrument in our hands-on gallery that I receive the most questions and comments about. What is this? How do you play it? And so forth. So congratulations on such a unique game changer.
Thank you. That's really gratifying to hear. I have that experience when I show the Strumstick to people individually, and of course we get lots of emails and phone calls telling us that as people pick them up. But you're kind of in the trenches with people of all different levels of musical ability trying things out. And since I designed it specifically for people who don't play to have access to music without a lot of frustration, that's just a great field report. And what you folks are doing and what we're doing we're definitely comrades in the musical access business. So we're just really happy that you found a place for the Strumstick there.
Absolutely. And after a little intro, I tell them, well, if you already play guitar, you know how to strum, you know this motion, and you just strap it on and pretty much go like you would on a guitar. They'll either start strumming just to kind of get the sound of it, or they'll look at the sheet and they'll start playing those melodies.
Yep. That's what those sheets are for too, is to let people realize that in about a minute and a half they can be playing a song. And I always compare the Strumstick to like a happy little playground, whereas learning guitar is like a prison yard. So it takes 6 months before you actually start to get some satisfaction from guitar. And I actually heard Eric Clapton in an interview on the radio, so I heard this with my own ears. This is not hearsay. And he said that when he first picked up guitar as a teenager, he played for about 4 or 5 months and then quit. And I just had to laugh when I heard that, because that's when everybody quits. The frustration peaks at about 4 or 5 months, but the satisfaction doesn't come until 6 months. And all the sensible people quit guitar at 4 or 5 months. No, I was not sensible. I just liked making noise on the darn thing. So I kept playing as, and, anyone who has learned guitar will say that if they recall those first 4 or 5 months, the thoughts most of the time are, why am I doing this? I'm never going to succeed at this. And so I think it takes a certain dogged persistence to succeed at guitar. Now, once you get over that hump, then you get a whole bunch of feedback because you're playing a song that you like and it's starting to sound like something. But before that, people are just thinking, I don't have any musical talent. And they're wrong, because Eric Clapton gave up guitar at the same point that you want to give up guitar. So, fortunately he went back. And he said that a year later, a friend said to him, "How's that guitar coming?" And he said, "Oh no, that's much too hard. I gave it up." And he said, "No, Eric, you have to go longer. And I know you really want to play." And obviously he was dying to play the blues. And his, I'm speculating on this part, but his desire to sound like the music that he wanted to play on guitar, what he could actually do was so far from that at 3 and 4 months, that your very desire and passion to render music can be a hindrance if you can't hang out in that beginner space, So I designed the Strumstick so that people could be getting satisfying sounds. It's not an Eric Clapton instrument yet, but there are people who approach that level with it. But the point is that the instruments aren't really designed for beginners. They're designed for virtuosos. When you play guitar, you're playing Andre Segovia's instrument, So I felt that there'd be a place for instruments that the expectations were lower because you haven't seen your heroes play it. So your own expectations are lower, and we're not trying to do as much. I like to think of the Strumstick as going from 0 to a very healthy intermediate level in terms of its complexity. Now, we've been able to push that much farther than that, but let's just say place it on the spectrum of instruments, 0 to intermediate, and that covers an awful lot, because probably 85% of the guitar players in America are intermediate guitar players, So if you can get to that level and play with your friends and play songs at midnight in your living room with a glass of wine and a candle going, any of that's like music. I always feel like this. Music is too important not for people to have at least some access to it. And it isn't as hard as people are afraid it is. And it isn't as hard as, those violin lessons and those guitar lessons may have made them think it is. So that's the end of my sermon.
Those are great insights, Bob. So many things you said there sort of brought me back in time. I remember my first 4 months learning how to play guitar. It hurt like heck. I mean, we're doing things to our fingers that are unnatural. We're developing these huge calluses on our fingertips, and the shapes that we're trying to push them into to play chords. It's pretty brutal. But then all of a sudden you hit this plateau and you go, wait a minute. Now I can play that G chord without thinking about it. Bam, there you are.
Yeah, and it's almost magic when that happens. It's like literally one day you're still fiddling with your fingers, reaching with the other hand to move them, and then the next day, oh, it worked. Oh my God, it worked. And it's like an accumulation of, I guess, neural pathways and muscle memory and like I say, dogged persistence. But we've tried to, I'm a lazy guy. We've tried to shortchange all that with the Strumstick and just cut right to, squeeze a string, strum. Not a bad sound. Dogs and cats are not fleeing in terror.
But, you say this, Bob, and yet it truly is a beautiful instrument. I mean, as I've played with it more and more and more, you discover chord voicings that are very unique, that would not be easily playable on a standard tuned guitar. And one of the things I was going to point out that I think is just brilliant, I don't know if this is a happy accident or if you were thinking this through, I think we all know its tune. I mean, looking at the frets, everybody who's viewing, you can see how much larger those frets are. And that's how you get the diatonic scale.
Yep.
Brilliant step. But in between that 6th and raised 7th, you've got a flatted 7th. And to my ear...
This is so you can end your song. Otherwise, it would be the song that never ends,
That's a whole new spin on it. To my ear, it creates a really folksy, woodsy sound. I mean, one of the first tunes that came to my mind when I was playing was Norwegian Wood. It works so well on that instrument.
Right.
It's perfect for that song.
Yeah, and so the principle of the Strumstick is derived from the principle of the Dulcimer. And I made Dulcimers for a bunch of years before I designed the Strumstick. And the Dulcimer, of course, sits on your lap. It's a mountain instrument. And a lot of people are unfamiliar with the Dulcimer, unless, like Joni Mitchell's recordings and some of the contemporary Dulcimer players that do amazing things on it. Sam Edelston is one in particular. But the Dulcimer works with a diatonic scale, do re mi scale. Sometimes they include what on Dulcimer they call the 6.5 fret, which really confuses people in other instruments like crazy. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 when they don't have that fret. So that must be technically it should be the 5.5 fret. But there's different tunings and all that. But the point being that I knew from Dulcimer that diatonic scale and drone tuning combination, 1-5-1, various combinations of ones and fives. In this case, it's D-A-D. A lot of Dulcimers are D, A, D, and then another D by itself. And it's 5 strings and 4 strings and 3 strings. But that musical principle is extremely accessible because, like as we say with the Strumstick, it's better to succeed in one key than to fail in 12 keys. So, and chromatic instruments that have the frets for all the halftones in an octave, like guitar and banjo and even ukulele, those instruments have wrong notes in between, quote, the right notes. And by wrong notes, I simply mean notes that are not in the scale of the song that you're playing in. Now, that makes them very versatile. They can play in all 12 keys. They can play complex chords that use notes from outside of the scale that you're using. But so much of, Western civilization music is based on either a diatonic major or a diatonic minor scale. So all those notes are just hanging around, tripping you while you're on your way to the notes you want when you're a beginner until you're ready to take advantage of that complexity. So I knew from playing Dulcimer and making Dulcimers that was a very, that's a very accessible affordance for beginners. And I had taught guitar for many years too, and I watched people struggle. And, some of it was because I wasn't the greatest teacher in the world, but some of the things I taught pretty well. And they still struggled. So it's just it's an endemic, it's a universal thing with guitar. You got to pay your dues for at least 5 months, and then you have to pay them for another 2 years if you want to join the blues club. But maybe another 20 years if you want to join the blues club. But with the Strumstick, I thought let's just aim low. Let's just keep it simple. Let's just do one key. Let's get people in the door. It's like the difference between playing toss and catch with your kid in the yard as opposed to trying out for the Yankees. I'm sorry, I am a Yankee fan. I'm from New Jersey. People don't, there's a lot of things that people accept that they can be just low-level beginners. Golf, for goodness sake. That's the only other thing that people fail at routinely and actually still manage to persist doing it. I don't know how they do it in golf. But nobody expects that they're going to be Tiger Woods, What they want to do is they want to hit the ball, they want to be out in nature, and they want to, they want they're competing with themselves. They're trying to get their 120 down to 110, So it's there's nothing wrong with being a beginner. That's really what it comes down to. And people that want to, have their dream of how good they could be happen right away are often frustrated. So like I said, we wanted to short circuit that whole dialogue and just cut right to making some notes.
I'd love you to see the smiles on the kids' faces when they pick up the Strumstick.
Say that.
I'd love you to see the smiles on the kids' faces who come through the museum. In particular, our school tours, of which we bring, I don't know, what's the number, 4,000 kids a year?
A little more than that, probably between 6,000 and 8,000. So, yeah.
Outstanding.
Yeah, I mean, they get a hold of this and all of a sudden, they're playing an instrument. And these are, a lot of these kids have just never had that opportunity. So,
right.
Say you've short-circuited the difficult part, and there they are in 5 minutes making music. So
that's great. Now, my hat's off to you guys, because I've worked with kids and with groups of kids, and it's a joy, but it's also it's a high energy level occupation. Anyone who has one young person to take care of knows how much time and energy that takes, and it's a labor of love. But when you've got like 20, 30 kids in the room and they all waiting in line to try 3 Strumsticks, you're part a musical angel and part traffic cop. Yeah.
Amen to that, but it's all worthwhile. I do have a question about the layout of the strings. With an Appalachian dulcimer, the melody string is actually closer to, say, the upper part of the instrument.
Right. If this was flat on my lap, the string closest to me would be the melody, what they call the melody string in dulcimer. Yep.
So with the Strumstick, were you thinking more in terms of guitar players in the sense that were you
definitely? Yes, absolutely. And what my reasoning was this, is that almost everyone at some time in their life has played air guitar, often in moments that have been recorded and sent to YouTube. But no one in recorded history has ever played air dulcimer. No one sits there going like, man, I am rocking out. And that's a joke. And I love dulcimer and I play dulcimer. But the music, the traditional music on dulcimer is regionally familiar, but not nationally familiar. So I thought the Strumstick would fulfill its potential much better if it was in a guitar familiar orientation, because this is what people are doing when they're doing air guitar. They're wiggling this hand around and they're wiggling this hand around. Now this wiggle doesn't help them very much, but this wiggle is exactly what you got to do. So they're halfway there. Plus you can stand up and walk around while you're playing the Strumstick, as compared to having it on your lap.
Which of course puts you right in the ballpark of being a rocker. I think somebody made a comment about the Strumstick once that boy, I don't think I've ever heard anybody rock that instrument, but you can do it.
Oh, you certainly can. Yeah. And when you were talking about the frets before, the reason I went on that long thing with the dulcimer was that the reason that extra fret is there, we call it the extra fret. It's 1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This one here, the seventh of the scale, flatted seventh, is because that does two things. Like I said, I made the joke about ending your song, but it lets you put at least one bluesy note in without having to stretch a string to get a blues note. It also lets you play in some minor keys, and it also lets you, if you put a capo at the third fret here. Let me just whip a capo on. This is the little flip capo that Harvey Reid makes. He makes a couple flip capos for partial capoing, but the one that they call the 3/5 capo for capoing 3 or 4 capo, 3 or 4 strings on guitar is perfect for capoing a Strumstick. It's the right size, and it can snug right up close to the fret, so you're not stretching the strings out of tune. That's a great thing. They call it the flip capo, Harvey Reid. But if you're capoed at the third fret, see, now that flatted seventh becomes the third of the scale. So immediately, if I'm playing on a D Strumstick, and now I'm in key of G, and there's some other advantages too in terms of the note it gives you on the middle string, also for a little more chord versatility. So it's our little token nod to chromaticism.
Well, and I've capoed mine on the first, second, third fret as well, and all of a sudden it gives you all the modes that are available in.
Yep. That fourth fret is nice because you can be in a minor scale or a major scale because of where the extra fret lands in there. So that's good for playing Woolly Bully and things like that.
Sounded like Joseph to me, but
okay.
Yeah, I've played that song many times, so I'm familiar.
Yeah, so obviously you've explored the fretboard and played with your capo in different places. That's great because it's the simplicity sometimes belies the versatility.
That's it's like doubly advantageous because, as you've been saying, for a beginner who doesn't want to get frustrated and put it down after a week, a month, 3 months, you're on it right away. But for somebody who's been playing for a while, you start exploring all the sonic possibilities, and there's quite a few. Early on in Mom at Home, we did a Strumstick session, and I played. I figured out a real nice arrangement of Over the Rainbow on it, which works.
Oh, nice. And that borders into chromatic, so that's moving around some to do that on the Strumstick.
Absolutely, I had to hop up there to that fifth and a half fret for the. I think it was the major, the two major chords. Anyway.
Da, 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 da.
Yeah, something like that.
There, yeah, exactly.
I was fiddling with it last night. I thought, oh, that took some work. So, but again, a lot of possibilities for players. Let me back up a little bit, Bob. I was reading up on the instrument, and this is something I didn't know. Your initial version was a single string version of the Strumstick.
Yes, the in 1981 I designed the backpacker guitar, which is now made by Martin under license, which happened in 1995 when they picked that up. No, 1994 maybe, whatever. And so I had made the backpacker guitar, and I had been making them for several years, and along the way I started thinking, this worked surprisingly well to compact. And if people are not familiar with the backpacker guitar, it's a very similar body shape to this, but it's a 6-string neck, and it's the body's a little wider and a little deeper, and it's tuned like a regular guitar, 24-inch scale. So it's a fairly slack with extra light strings on it. So it's a guitar with you. It never will replace the D28 or even the single O by any means. But when you're out in the woods and you just wish you could play guitar, that's the guitar you could have with you when you're not going to have one of those. So, so that instrument I had designed, and this leads to the Strumstick. I had designed that because I had a friend that owned a Mexican restaurant, and I would go there and play a couple of tunes and get a free lunch sometimes because I liked hanging out with a nice group of people there, and it was a free lunch. And there, I was an early luthier, so you never turn down a free lunch when you're an early luthier. And when the weather got good, I wanted to ride that little Yamaha 350 motorcycle I had to the restaurant, but I also wanted to play for lunch, and I couldn't do both of those, because I was not going to bring a good guitar on the bike, especially the little bike. So that got me started to think about, well, how could I have a guitar that I could take on a motorcycle? And people have, over the ages, they've made folding neck guitars, and they've made guitars that looked like little miniature guitars, like a bloated ukulele with 6 strings on it, and things like that. And I just thought, well, how else could you approach this? And so I thought, the minimum you need is a 2x4 with frets and enough wood to keep the bridge from collapsing towards the nut under the pull of the strings, and that would let you at least finger things. And people have made, solid body things like that in the past. And then I started wondering, well, how big a sound box do you need to actually have something where you can actually hear some notes come out? And that was what led to the first backpacker guitars. And then, they evolved a bit bigger over a couple of years. And when I finally licensed it to Martin, it was about the size that it is now. But since the first ones I had made were only about 3 inches wide at the bottom, and they did work, the idea of, well, how much smaller could I go came to me. So I thought, well, let's just cut right to 1 string with just a tiny little sound box and see what it sounds like. And I stuck with that 3-inch wide at the end, and it tapered just like the Strumstick does, the contemporary Strumstick. But it was a much narrower neck, and it only had 1 string, and it was tuned to D, and you played it starting from the 3rd fret. So it was basically exactly, it was just a major scale, and I did the 3rd fret so you could go below the tonic a little bit as well as go above it, and it was a charming little instrument, and we call that the single string Strumstick, and I made those for. I probably made about maybe a couple hundred of those, and it was partly a novelty, and along the way it got discovered. There's a British composer named Nicholas Maw, who was a contemporary classical composer, and he stumbled on a Strumstick someplace, and he wrote some very interesting modern music in general, and he created a classical piece called Ghost Dances. One element of that suite uses a single string Strumstick, and we every year we get we get a request from some orchestra somewhere that says we need a single string strumstick because we're going to be performing Maugh's Ghost Dances, and we need a single string strumstick. So we would, we kept making them even after we switched to the 3-string for that purpose. And eventually the music publisher wound up buying a half dozen single string strumsticks so that when they lease out the score, whatever they do with the score, to make the exchange for money there, they include a strumstick with the score. So we are in the classical literature.
Wow.
But that one string, obviously, it is a limit to what you can do with one string, especially since they're not sustained notes. On a flute or a whistle, you only have one note, but you can sustain them. Whereas, great thing for sketching and exploring melodies, and a great way to start kids playing music. But it needs a little something. And I thought, well, gee, if I just added 2 more strings, a la the dulcimer, it's no more complex than a single string to play, because on the strumstick you can be playing just one string while the other 2 strings create the background. So it was kind of like, oh, free backup band, So here's you on lead on the 1 string, only worrying about 1 string, but then you've got your trusty backup band making you look good up front. And I thought, well, that's a sweet spot. 4, now you're starting to get a little intimidating. And 2 strings could have worked, but you can't get a chord if you wanted to, a 3-note chord with only 2 strings. So I thought, well, there's a real opportunity here for an instrument with 3 strings and a diatonic scale, and and the rest is mystery, as we like to say.
It's kind of the original band in the box, then. That's pretty sweet.
In a simple way.
You saw a need there, and you filled it, which is so much a part of our story. Innovators like yourself who see there's something that hasn't been done yet, and I'm gonna fill that void.
Right back to Les Paul.
Right. Have you? I mean, that piece you're talking about sounds very intriguing to me. Have you heard it performed or recording of it?
I have heard it, and let's just say it's in a contemporary idiom. And if you like music on the fringes, it's really well put together, and it's a great piece of music. Mozart is not rolling over in his grave, but it's modern. I would have been comparably excited if Philip Glass had been that person, and I love Philip Glass's music, so it's in that league.
That's a great league to be in. I love Philip Glass as well. Very innovative composer. Really pushes the edges and the boundaries.
Well, yeah, it kind of invented a whole new sector of music that only other, maybe perhaps some gamelan touches into that kind of slow sequence change things. But he's
very
great.
much so. I don't mean to sidebar too much, but would you put John Adams in that same kind of ballpark as Philip Glass?
I'm not sure I know John Adams.
Okay. I'm trying to think of one of his pieces.
Other than the founder, John Adams.
No, there's a composer, John Adams. Just take a listen if you can.
I'll have to check him out.
So it's funny. You've touched on several things that have now compelled me to mention this. One of your comments earlier was, we don't necessarily see our heroes playing the instruments, so we're not setting that bar. One of my heroes, who will actually be with us next Friday, is John Anderson.
Oh, wonderful!
I'm hoping John's watching today. I sent him the link for this afternoon.
Hi, John, if he's there.
Yeah, hi, John. I hope you're watching. I went up to see him play a solo show up in Santa Barbara several years ago, and my daughter was with me, and we're getting into our seats and settling in, and in the center of the stage where his microphone stand was, I saw this very unique looking instrument hanging off the mic stand. I said, what? I was just like the people that visit the museum. What is that? And of course, at a certain point, John picked it up and played it for a couple of his songs. Matter of fact, I saw him last summer with his new band, 1,000 Hands. Middle of the show, he pulled out the Strumstick and played a song with the full band playing behind him.
Yeah, great.
That was my introduction, and I had to find out about it from there.
there's a kind of a story with that, and I know that he on stage tells this story sometimes, so it's not giving anything away. But I met him at the NAMM show. He came into my booth, and he's a total instrument aficionado. He has collected instruments from all over the world, and he was charmed by the Strumstick, and so I put one on him, and he started strumming away, and with that incredible voice, he just starts vocalizing and making up a song on the spot, and I'm just like, oh my God, and he kind of nodded to me like, yeah, go ahead, and so I'm playing with him, and we kind of jammed on the two Strumsticks and him vocalizing for about 10 minutes. And he when we stopped, he went like this, and I just said, John, that's yours. I said, you have brought so much incredible music into the world, and I would just like you to have that in exchange for the wonderful moment we had playing together. And he said, thank you very much. And he said, I'm going to use it. In fact, that thing that I was vocalizing, I'm going to turn that into a song. And so then when he was hospitalized for an extended period some years later, and I heard from him after he had recovered, and he told me that they wouldn't let him sing, and apparently he would have an operation and have to recuperate, and then another I don't have any idea what the situation was they were dealing with, but basically he's stuck in the hospital, and of all people, John Anderson is not allowed to sing, Yeah. So he said that he stayed sane because they would let him play the Strumstick. So he would he told me he would wander the corridors of the hospital in his gown, strumming away at the Strumstick, and making up melodies and hearing songs in his head and all that stuff. And he said that it really helped him through a tough time. And it just, and things like that just touch your heart. If you're an artist who makes tools for other artists, and then other artists go and use those tools to expand their own art, you feel like you're on the continuum. The connection. That's any artist who learns from all the artists who have been before, that have their work has surrounded them, whether they studied them or not. And it's kind of a magic feeling to have a musical talent of his caliber find this to be a very useful tool for his composing and for his his personal well-being, and then now to want to perform the songs that he has written on it, and he still writes on it. So that's just very exciting.
That's a fantastic story.
Wow.
I would call that a grand slam homer for you as a designer, as an innovator.
Well,
if I'm going to just say one more thing because I'm feeling a little poetic. It's almost like things like that are so good that they're not a grand slam. They're like magic. You know what I mean? It's not like, so you don't feel like, oh my God, I'm successful, or oh boy, I really did something great here. You're just like, you're like humble and grateful. That's really the feelings that wash over you with a situation like that. So thank you for what you said.
Well, and if I might interject too, everything you just said up to that point was like an entire revelation about experiencing music from a person who creates musical instruments. You're obviously a very amazingly talented guitarist and artist too, but there's a different connection. There's a completely different connection to music that you just so elegantly, just put into a phrase based on this entire experience. And I'd never heard it put that way before. And I just had this revelation, like, oh my gosh, I can't imagine what that experience is like. And just being part of this entire ecosystem of enjoying music, making music, and then being part of the one of those rare opportunities to provide the tools that is part of this, entire connection. That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that, Bob. That's wonderful.
Oh, you're welcome. And someday one of your drum tracks may get sampled and wind up in a Grammy-winning, hip hop production or something like that. And in a way, that's the kind of the same thing. Is that some art moves into other art and then facilitates that other art. So
yeah. Well, I can only hope that happens.
That's true. And just to cap that off, you had mentioned gamelan a little bit ago. That's the thing that really brought John to my mind, because that's an instrument that he loves. One of his stories is about traveling through the forest somewhere there in I can't remember exactly where he was, but he came upon a gamelan orchestra, and
Maybe Bali. Yeah.
I think that's what he said. Yeah. So, you know, I bet you our viewers are really anxious to hear the Strumstick in action. I see
Sure.
several different versions of them behind you there, so maybe you can
Yep.
tell us about them and give us a little run on them.
Okay, so this is the what we think of as our main Strumstick. This is the D33. We also call that the Grand Strumstick, but it's the one that we sell the most of. The original one, the original 3-string I designed was the G, because that's the same. This is the same scale length that I used on that 1-string in Search of Smallness. And I love the way the G sounds, and I use the G for some songs. But as soon as I made the first batch of, I made like 3 or 4 to start with of Gs and tuned them up and played them, I immediately thought, oh, now I have to do a bigger one that tunes in D. Because I play, I play a little bit of Celtic music, and when I throw my hat into the ring and croak out a song, a D is a friendlier key for me than G more often, and so I knew that I had to do a D, and that would let me make the body a little bigger and get a little more fullness with the larger body, the resonance of lower strings. And I could have tuned the G. I could have put strings on it. I could either tune it down to G, it'd be a little down to D, it'd be a little slack. I don't know if you can see the difference in the scaling. I'm going to line up the nut, the 0 fret on both of them, and you can see the difference in where the bridges land.
Yeah.
Here's the bridge on this one if you can't see it in the light.
Yeah.
So it's about a 2.5-inch difference in the scale length. And like I said, I could have put heavier strings on it, but the sound box is so small that you don't have a lot of resonating support for anything lower than the low G on that, and even that that's a pretty nasal sound already. So with the larger body tuned to D, now both of these are just playing through the mic. So there's a little fuller sound, and that's a like I said, a good key for me to sing in. And between the two of them, one in key of G and one in key in D, now you can retune one or the other of them and get to any key, because you can tune this D-A-D, or you could tune it up to E and just barely up to F, and you can tune it down to C and down to B, and just barely, it's a little slack and twangy sounding down in A, and then the G can tune up to A and then down to F and down to E. So between the two of them, you could cover any key without having to use a capo. So I felt that was a good spacing in keys for the pair of them. And so this is the basic, just played acoustically. I'm deliberately doing kind of a mountain sound there, and it's a thing that's very interesting. I was just doing this on this exact thing on the online streaming lesson that I do on Thursday nights, and that's if you have the 3 open strings, obviously they're free notes, right? They're right there, 1, 2, 3, and then you've got open, and then 1st fret, and then 2nd fret on the 3rd string, open and 1st fret on the middle string, open, 1st fret, 2nd fret on the 1st string. So you've got, 3 notes here, 3 notes here, and 2 notes here. Now you could include this one too, but I'm leaving that out for a reason. Because if you just play, it's a mountain melody composing sketchpad right away, and then you add little slides and things. Hammer-on, slides, and pull-offs, and now you're doing almost a banjo thing. And I found out that you could, believe it or not, you can do claw hammer on it. Now, with your claw hammer on a banjo, of course, you've got that high 5th string that your thumb's popping off that makes that high ring up top, like this note here. So you don't have that, but I'm just popping what would be the bass string, so to speak. So it sounds a little bit like those gut string fretless banjos that are one of the early, forerunners of the modern banjo.
Nice.
So that's the basic D there, and this is with the spruce top. That's the least expensive one that we make in the Ds. But then along the way, a couple of years ago, I designed this model, which we call the Big Wave Strumstick, and the design aesthetic that I'm working with, the original design of the Strumstick, is I wanted spare and unassuming, bordering on cute, because I felt that if you just made a $6,000 guitar and you show it to someone and they say, "Oh, that's cute," you're a little nonplussed. But when people are intimidated by an instrument and they say, "Oh, that's cute," they're feeling safe about it. You know what I mean? So I thought that the design one of my favorite questions I get, and some people say, "Aren't you insulted when people say this?" Sometimes if I'm at an art show showing the Strumsticks, they'll say, "Is that an instrument?" And I take that as a compliment, because I wanted people to see it as an interesting object, and then discovered that, oh, it's an easy to play instrument, rather than going into all their little story in their head about them and the instruments that they can't play and all the failures they've had in the past and the time that the string broke when they were on stage and they were so embarrassed and yada, 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 So the basic design aesthetic is austere and simple and relatively unornamented. We do put the little, we put inlay in the sound hole, wood inlay on the spruce ones and a pearl inlay on the exotic wood ones. But I wanted to design a Strumstick that gave no consideration whatsoever to practical considerations, like being easy to make and being, therefore inexpensive, and being austere and simple and not intimidating people. And so what I came up with was the Big Wave, and let me hold you this one up because you can see it better on the camera with the spruce top. So it's it's a ridiculously flamboyant shape, and as I worked the shape out and working the curves and things like that, it immediately struck me as breaking waves, a perfect curl on a shoulder high wave at a good surf break. So,
my language, sir.
Yeah. Well, you said boogie board, so I'll be out there with my trusty longboard. I'm not very good, but I have more fun than anybody on the beach.
That's what it's about, having fun. Yeah, no, I love the design of those. And I love the sound hole design. Is that up toward the upper bow there?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so this I'll pull this one over again because the contrast is better here. So on this one, I just have the holes only here, and I extended them to the lower. And what this is people. I have a whole little blog article about sound hole design because people often think that the purpose of a sound hole is to, quote, let the sound out. And to a certain extent, if you cover up the sound hole, the sound gets muffled. But the real purpose of a sound hole is to couple the air on the inside of the Strumstick with the air on the outside of the Strumstick, or a guitar, if you're talking about a guitar. And if you'll bear with me, if you think about a guitar top, let me get this right, flat like that. Okay, so the strings are vibrating, like a jump rope in an arc, right? Okay, but what they're really doing is they're pulling this way and this way and this way and this way. So the vibration they transfer to a guitar bridge is not as much up and down motion as it is pull, release, pull, release, pull, release, pull, release. And that makes the bridge rock, tip forward, tip back, tip forward, tip back, tip forward, back, plus a little tiny bit of up and down, as that's kind of a complex motion that the bridge does, and it's almost microscopic at the frequencies of music, right? But that means that the top of a guitar or a Strumstick gets pushed in when the bridge rocks forward, and gets lifted up slightly as the tension releases and lets the top push back against the strings. So you've really got the soundboard of a guitar is a pumping air in and out of the sound hole by pumping up and down like that, and it pumps at the frequencies that the string drives it at, plus shaped by the resonant characteristics of its solid physicalness, plus the air chamber underneath. But if the air inside the body cannot be squirted out the sound hole, what happens, it acts like a hydraulic cylinder. It's like a compressible medium. So all this up and down it's just making the air inside there. When it comes up, it lowers its pressure. And of course, when you lower the pressure, that means it tries to suck the top back down. And when you push it in, it increases the pressure. And of course, if you push on a spring, it tries to push your hand back up. So all that compressed energy, either being, rarefied or compressed inside, is working against the vibration of the string if you do not have sound holes. So basically, if you could see it, the up and down of the string is squirting little jets of air in and out the sound hole. Okay,
Awesome.
and that's acoustic coupling. That's one aspect of acoustic coupling. And that's the first job of a sound hole. Now, the shape, the size in surface area of the sound hole governs what frequencies are favored in certain ways. Okay, so if you have on a guitar, if you have a very small sound hole, it's like the smaller the smaller the opening on a flute fingering, the higher pitch the note is. The bigger the opening, the lower pitch the note is. It kind of pushes the resonances of the body in the same way. So for a given shaped body cavity and a given size of chamber, certain frequencies are going to be, boosted, and some are going to be disfavored. And so partly by trial and error, and partly by there's some well-developed theory now for this with violin and guitar. You can determine what you want the resonant characteristics of the body to be in order to best support the range of notes that a guitar is asked to play. And the size and shape of the sound hole affects that relationship. So, but it's much more the size than it is the shape. So to go back to the regular Strumstick, and stop me if this is getting too technical.
No, this is fascinating for me anyway.
Okay. So I worked out literally by trial and error what I felt was the optimum size of this sound hole, and I made them with bigger sound holes and smaller sound holes. So when the sound hole gets bigger, the instrument gets nasally. And I actually said that backwards. When you make the sound hole smaller on an instrument, you actually increase the bass frequency of the cavity. When you make the sound hole bigger, because what you're essentially doing is making the resonant part of the cavity smaller when you make the opening bigger. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's the opposite of a flute. I misspoke there. But so when I make the sound hole bigger, the instrument gets thin and almost like it's muffled compared to. And if you make the sound hole too small, it also gets muffled because now that there's too much air resistance in there at the frequencies that the Strumstick's trying to vibrate at. So I knew that this area of sound hole, I forget what it is in square millimeters now, but that area, I literally sought to recreate that same area with this. So, and the way I did that is I took, on a computer, I took the circle that's the size of the regular sound hole, and I didn't calculate the area of all these little circles. I just took them all and I piled them in there. I dragged them in on the drawing program and I counted how many circles of different sizes would fill that circle nicely. So I have the same area in these circles as I had on this. And then I added an extra sweep because this is a larger sound chamber than this was. So I wanted it to be a bit more, but it was just kind of fun dragging all those little black dots of different sizes into the other circle. And now, so this is the big wave. Now this, I'm plugged in on this one. So you're hearing it partly on the mic. In fact, let's do this. Let me kill the pickup. So here it is, just on the mic. And you can hear there's definitely what you could actually hear. Oh, there's a little bit of bass happening there. There's a little bit of bottom. And bottom is not a word that you usually associate with the Strumstick. It's all a mid-range and treble instrument, but this has a little bit of a bottom, somewhat like an Irish bouzouki or a cittern kind of a tone. And then and we do put pickups. I think that's where I had it. There's that sound level still okay there?
Yeah.
So the pickup in any of the Strumsticks obviously lets you, it grabs some of the bass that the string is putting in, but the small body cavity is not supporting well. So you can get a fuller sound when you're using the pickup, and you can also then, of course, all the different things you can do once the signal is electronic. You can add bass to it. You can run it through all kinds of effects, and even turn it into MIDI and all that sort of stuff. So having a pickup is a great adjunct, and almost very, very few people now play on stage without a piezo pickup in their guitar or an internal microphone or something like that.
Absolutely true. It gives you the advantage, as you say, of using all those options, MIDI, effects, and you're not having to rely on standing directly in front of a microphone the whole time. You can move around while you play.
Yeah,
I'm glad you brought that up too, Bud, because we are actually pretty deep in a volunteer renovation training. I don't know if I told you, but the museum's being renovated right now.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah, it's going to be fantastic.
Too bad for you. Hard work.
And we just covered effects pedals and MIDI in training. So you've sort of validated what we're training our volunteers. Can I jump in with one quick question? I definitely want to hear a song on this beautiful instrument.
Sure thing.
But let me throw a couple of questions at you, if I may. This is from Brian Donaldson. He's one of the volunteers I was just referring to, and a faithful Mom at Home viewer. He asks, kind of a double question, can frets be added, and can a Strumstick be built with movable frets?
The word can is a multifaceted verb. So I will say that frets can be added. We don't. So you'll have to find a luthier to do it. And if you go so far as to do that, if you write to us, info@strumstick.com, I can send you a piece of the fret wire that's the same height that we're using. So when they put the slots in, the grooves for where you want your frets, you'll be using the same fret wire height rather than having to do a lot of leveling. And I'm a big fan of not leveling frets. I mean, obviously the surface needs to be level, but that parabolic shape that a well-formed fret wire has, and then people flatten it out in order to level the frets, that flat surface, when the string vibrates on a flat surface, that it's hitting the minuscule part of that flat on every vibration, so it cuts down sustain. So if you have to level frets and make them flat, then the best thing is to go in and literally reshape every fret, which some people are finicky enough to do. Now, on an electric guitar, you've got enough sustain often available, so the smoothness of the frets sliding up and down when they're a little flatter and wider is more important. But anyway, so the frets could be positioned where he wants them by slots. Now, as far as movable frets, there are numerous movable fret instruments in the world. However, the necks for those instruments are designed to accommodate those movable frets. So you could conceivably work that out for the Strumstick neck. I have not done that. So I'll leave that at that. Now, I have done a thing where I've taken, if you're familiar with what an escutcheon pin is, it's a little brass nail with a round head used for putting little brass nameplates, escutcheons, onto, frames of paintings and, medallion awards and things like that. But anyway, I've drilled holes and put escutcheon pins in the neck slightly off the center line of the string. And this is, I don't know if this can be, I don't think I can get close enough, but if this is the string right here, I'll move it over a 1/16 of an inch, and I'll put that escutcheon pin in where the note in between this fret and this fret would be, such that if you're fretting this, if you fret the string here, normally that would fret up at the 2nd fret. But if you push it sideways onto the escutcheon pin, it's now lifted up enough over this fret that now you've got a half tone note there. So, but it's not in the way when you want to use it. But it's visually a horror show because you've got these little dots in places and you have to learn how to use them. It's not something we've done mainstream, but I don't mind if somebody wants to hot rod their Strumstick by putting escutcheon pins so they can push the string over to get a half tone fret instead of just a stretched note. I don't have any problem with that.
Gotcha.
Hope that answers the questions.
I think it beautifully answers the question. And to me, at that point, I'm going to grab my guitar if I want all those half notes inside.
Well, that's yeah, exactly.
Follow-up question from Brian, and I think you already addressed this, but you can go ahead and confirm this for him. He asks if you're using a piezo pickup inside the Strumstick.
Yes, yeah, we have a piezo pickup that Shatton pickups designed for us for the Strumstick, and that's what we use.
Fantastic. We are coming up on the hour, and I want to respect your time that you've so generously given us. But I did want to ask, without sort of focusing on the negative of the situation we're all dealing with right now, what are you in Strumstick? What have you been doing these past several months during this time?
It's a good question, and keeping busy is the best answer to that, because I've found that one of the ways that I show and sell the Strumsticks is art fairs and craft shows, and none of them are happening, and the trade shows are not happening, et cetera, et cetera. So I've devoted a lot of time to refining my website, refining elements of design on the Strumstick, things having to do with how we make them, and some things that may be products down the line. They may not. They're just experiments and things. And also I've put a lot of effort into online resources for people learning the Strumstick, and part of that was the streaming lessons that I do every Thursday night. If they go to strumstick.com and look under the instructions tab, you'll see one of the links in the drop-down menu at the top navigation bar. One of them will be streaming lessons, and they can get the information for what the link is for that week's lesson, and all the backlinks are on a page there too. So that teaching people how to do interesting things on the Strumstick, and there's some beginner things, some intermediate things, and some crazy don't bother doing it advanced stuff in each lesson. So it's intended to cover a broad range of things like that. And then developing things for the here. Be the first in your neighborhood. This thing's called I call this the chord clock. And what this is a key changer. So very fast. The big hand. You put the big hand on the key you want to wind up in. So I'll put it up here on D. And let's see how close I can get here. Swing this over here.
There you go. Yeah.
Pardon my backhand. Okay, so there's the group of the most important chords in key of D, all positioned in a certain relationship. The tonic chords, the big D in the center, and then the A is the 5, and the G is the 1, and then the relative minor is right under the D, and so on. And then all the other chromatic keys are in the same relationship. So if you're looking up a song on the internet and it's in key of F, say, okay, not a guitar player's favorite key, and nowhere near a favorite key for a Strumstick player. This one's loose here. So if you look at the group for the F corresponds to the D, and the C corresponds to the A, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you can very quickly transpose from one key to another, and I know that there's just a gajillion songs on the internet, and people are always saying, well, how do I play, Don't Stop Believing on the Strumstick? And then you go and you look it up, it's in key of E, and that means that they have to be able to change the chords to key of D, or they don't play it, unless they're lucky enough to find someone who's already transposed it for them. So this chord clock is something that I have been working on for a while, but I had time to finish it off.
Nice.
And it...
So it's basically a
big one and a small one. That's on the website, and you can even use it for free on the website, because you don't need the hands. You could just look at the circle and say, oh, F, B flat, C. Oh, that's the same as D, G, A. So you don't even need the hands. You can just look at the picture of it on the website and transpose to your heart's content. And I don't mind if people do that, because it's a facilitation tool. So anyway, the things like that.
You've really utilized this time well, which is great.
Yeah, it would, otherwise I'd be stealing time from more productive work that I should be doing,
Don't tell, but same here. Well, Bob, we have to thank you. This has been so wonderful. There's so many other things I'd love to ask, but I do want to wrap it up at the hour. One of our very faithful viewers and also a museum member, Susan Fancher, asks if we could have one more song. So, would you care to play us out?
I will play you out, and I'll just keep on playing until you can end your stream wherever you want. And I want to thank you very much for the opportunity. I had a blast talking to you guys, and by extension, talking to the people that are supporters of the museum, that are watching and learning and all that stuff. And I just wish everyone be well, be safe, be smart, and play as much music as you can, because you got time on your hands. So. I'm going to make this up so you don't have to worry about copyright stuff.
Thank you, Bob. Wonderful. I love it, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for joining us again for another episode of Mom at Home. It was a grand pleasure meeting Bob and his creation, and actually seeing the philosophy, the passion behind the instrument itself. So I'm so glad you could join us today. We do have, Bob mentioned that he's been doing live stream lessons from his website. So we have those in the show notes. If you go to our website, museumofmakingmusic.org, go to the Mom at Home link, and you'll find the past episodes there, because this episode is now in the books. We've got it. You can find it in the past episodes from here on out. But also you can visit strumstick.com for a direct link to his website. And for more upcoming episodes of the Museum of Making Music's Mom at Home, go to our website again, museumofmakingmusic.org. Again, we kind of touched on it today. We're going to have John Anderson, co-founder of the progressive rock band Yes, with us next week. And I didn't realize that there was a Strumstick connection there, so that's wonderful. I'm so glad to link these two episodes together. Following that, September 4th, we'll have Crystal Morris, co-founder and CEO of Gator Cases. There is an amazing story about the start of that company, the evolution, and the innovations that they've done as well. I love getting to meet all these music makers. Until then, everyone, have a great weekend, stay safe, be good, and we'll see you next time.